I was recently reading John Galsworthy's The Forsyte Saga, which is a series of books set during the late Victorian period, which focus upon a wealthy upper-class family known as the Forsytes. The first of these books is called A Man of Property, which refers both to the character of Soames Forsyte and his views concerning his beautiful young wife Irene, which are indeed very singular and loathsome. The reason for this being is that she is the property referred to in the title, and when she has a passionate love affair with the architect who is designing a house for her and her husband, the repercussions are monstrous. They are only alluded to in the book, but are brought to the fore in the original BBC adaptation made in 1967. It is quite a harrowing scene for its day, and it involves Soames asserting, as he sees it, his rights over his property. He rapes Irene, and keeps her locked up in her rooms away from the rest of the world and her friends. She does eventually manage to pluck up the courage to leave him, but becomes homeless the moment she does, as she has no income to speak of, except for what Soames had given her in the past. The only thing that stops her from becoming poor and destitute is the kindness of the Forsyte patriarch, old Jolyon Forsyte, who befriends her in his twilight days, and leaves her a sizable sum in his will to make sure that she is independent and no longer at the mercy of men like Soames. I bring this up because it reminds me of the comments made by one certain politician some weeks ago during an interview for Today. Here is a little clip to remind you of who it is I speak of.
With abortion, it is something that is done to the unborn child.
Are you completely opposed
different.
to abortion in all circumstances?
Yes, I am.
Rape and incest?
Sexual violence?
I'm afraid so.
Really?
Life is sacrosanct and begins at the point of conception. And I think it is wrong.
So if a woman is raped, say you were Prime Minister, and a woman is raped by a family member, right? You would say she had absolutely no right to have that baby aborted?
No, she would have a right under UK law.
Yeah, but you wouldn't agree with that, right?
But that law is not going to change.
No, but what's your personal opinion?
My personal opinion is that life begins at the point of conception and abortion is morally indefensible.
You would make her have that baby?
Well, I wouldn't, because that wouldn't be the law
I
of the land.
understand that.
Now, admittedly, it sounds quite one-sided when you're getting badgered by a man as inept as Piers Morgan. But personally, what I find morally indefensible about this interview is not a woman's right to abortion, but the comments made by Jacob Rees Mogg, not just about women's rights, but also about same-sex marriage, which he makes earlier and later again in the same interview. But from what I've gathered, Mr. Rees Mogg is a man who is not unused to this kind of controversy, for this is merely the latest in a very long line of indefensible statements that he has made in his very undistinguished career. His comments have ranged far and wide, from his belief that it is uplifting to see food banks because it shows how compassionate and charitable we are as a country, that there is a need for the Conservative Party to make a broad and comprehensive offer to UKIP in order to create a coalition based on unifying and underlying philosophy, and who once described Vince Cable's belief that 0 hours contracts were exploitative as the standard response of the left to market forces. Such is the reputation of this undistinguished man. Now, I keep saying undistinguished for the very simple fact that here we have a man who's being tipped for party and prime ministerial leadership, but who has never held any office of any kind in his life. He has never made a crucial decision capable of affecting the lives of millions of people, and most important of all, he is a person living on an entirely different plane of life from those very same people who suffer under austerity and other such heartless Tory measures. He is, in short, a politician whose only noticeable achievement is for being noticeable, and not, I may say, for the right reasons either. And yet why is he being so highly tipped to succeed Theresa May? It is, I am sad to admit, the very worst right-wing elements of the Tory party reacting, just as the left-wing elements of the Labour Party have done in recent years, to the fall of the neoliberal era of centrist politics. It is, in effect, the Tory party's Jeremy Corbyn moment. And if the Tories are indeed at all genuine in their desire to see Rees Mogg leading the party, not just into the next election, whenever that might be, but as Prime Minister also, then they have become very seriously demented in their ability to choose competent leaders. But then again, some might have argued that the same was true when the Labour Party voted in Jeremy Corbyn. Namely, that the party membership was living in cloud cuckoo land and that it was political suicide to allow someone as left-wing and socialist an outlook as Jeremy Corbyn to become party leader. But I would argue, in turn, that there are two major differences between the election of Corbyn and the potential election of Rees Mogg. Firstly, that with Corbyn, there was a significantly larger constituency of people involved in the electing of the Labour Party leader. The Labour Party leader. And it's an electorate made up of MPs, trade unions, and members of the public, whereas with the Tory party, there is not nearly as wide a demographic of people involved. All Rees Mogg needs to become party leader is a 60% majority of Conservative MPs. A group of people who I'm sure when the time comes, if it comes, will vote as they have always voted, not in the public or national interest, but in their own interest, as to how their careers might benefit under a Rees Mogg premiership. And the second point is that Corbyn's election wasn't just a small cross-section of the party voicing its anger against the higher echelon's failures, as it is now with Rees Mogg. Corbyn's election was a political movement, a reaction against the failure of the neoliberal trait that has dominated the Labour Party from Blair through to Brown and then Miliband. When people voted for Corbyn, they were voting for a man who promised change, rather than more of the same, which is what undoubtedly lost Miliband the 2015 election. They voted for a man who promised to do his best in the interests of the many rather than the few. It seems a ridiculous promise to make during these days of economic instability, an instability of our own making, it has to be admitted. But then again, so was the welfare state. At the time of its founding, nobody believed that the NHS could survive, not when the country was in debt to the tune of £3,000 million. But this is the very reason why Churchill lost that election in 1945. It was his own inability to recognise the fact that the people who had fought the war now wanted something to show for it, and that they were not living to go on living. That they were not willing to go on living as they had lived. Which is why they voted for a better future under the Labour Party. It's what we need now today, and I'm not the only one to think this way. We need men like Clement Attlee and Jeremy Corbyn to inspire us out of austerity, to change the nature of our society towards something better, something that will give us hope in our hour of need. So I ask you now, what do we have to hope for under a Rees Mogg premiership? It wouldn't just be more of the same, but a reversal of fortune completely, a return, no doubt, to the Victorian society which I described earlier in the Forsyth saga, a return to laissez-faire economic policies, of free enterprise, when there was no welfare state, no health care for the poor, not even social insurance. A world where women have no rights to speak of, no right to decide what happens to their bodies, no right to vote for who governs them, and no right either to stand as one of those elected representatives. A world in which women were effectively the property of their fathers until they married, whereby they became the property of their husbands. A world also where the only right granted to homosexuals was the right to be imprisoned and shunned by society, labelled as being abnormal and degenerate. A world with no workers' rights, a world where the wealth does not trickle down, but only ever trickles upwards, leaving the poor destitute and the uber-rich even more obscenely wealthy. That is what Jacob Rees Mogg has to offer us. Now you might ask me, what do I think of all this personally? Well, I have no words to speak other than this little rant I've just given you, but I will add something more. I'm not the most articulate of men, I will admit, so I like using other people's words sometimes. I'm going to play you a clip here that describes quite nicely my feelings as the Jacob Rees Mogg. It is a clip from a film called The Lion in Winter, a film that stars Peter O'Toole as Henry II. I think it's Henry II anyway. In this part of the film, Henry II has finally snapped and has become so disgusted with the attitude of his sons, because sooner or later one of them must inherit, and they all want the throne, that he decides to turn upon them. And this, my friends, is what he says, and I find it quite fitting for this occasion.
You're not mine! We're not connected! I deny you! None of you will get my kingdom, I leave you nothing, and I wish you plague, may all your children break and die!
So I do I wish the same for Jacob Rees Mogg. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.